Hey, I'd like to tell you about this cool field trip I went on with my Democracy in Action class to the Yuba River, which is by Nevada City. The main point of the trip was to learn about the dams that are on the Yuba River and how they affect the ecosystem, the water, the fish, including the salmon that live in it, and just look at the politics surrounding it. We met with 3 different groups that all had very different opinions about the dams and the Yuba River, and it was really eye-opening to just talk with each one of them and get their perspectives, what they believed in, and learn that there was no right answer. It was a very complicated issue, and I learned a lot from it. Before we went on the field trip, we read several different documents so that we were well educated and informed about the issues that we'd be learning about. The first one that we learned about was about salmon, and when I heard that one of the main issues was salmon, my first thought was, who cares about salmon except for how to cook it? But I soon found out that the salmon life cycle was a lot more complex than that. The salmons are born from eggs, and they'll grow and mature for several months to a year as they drift downstream. Then they'll go through a process called smolt, where their freshwater bodies change and adapt so that they can go out in the salt water, the ocean, and live. And then after several years of growing, maturing, becoming full adults, and feeding, they'll return back up the stream, and they don't go through the process of smolt again, so that from the moment they go back into freshwater, they cannot eat or do any of the processes that they need to live. And they'll go thousands and thousands of miles upstream, back to the very place where they themselves were born. No one knows how they can sense that. And that's where they will start their own reproductive life cycle, which is the last thing that they'll do before they die. For the females, that involves laying their eggs. And the way that they do that is they need to carve out lines in the bottom of the rivers where they can put their eggs, and their eggs will be protected. But as you know, salmon don't have hands or thumbs, so that the way that they will carve out gouges in the river is literally just by slamming their body over and over into the rocks. And as they slam their body into it, the rocks will shift just for a second, and the water will carry it down a little, or just slightly move them. Do that again and again until their entire body is virtually destroyed, and that's when they can finally lay their eggs, their last final act, and then they die. They're spawned out, and within 2 weeks they'll be dead. The males, on the other hand, are waiting for the female to make her red, which is what where she lay her eggs is called, and after that they will fight each other to determine who can fertilize the eggs. And after that, win or lose, they too are spawned out and they will die within a few weeks. So their last final act is to try to continue this process and life cycle so that their young can live. So at this point, I knew about the salmon and I knew why they were there, but I didn't know how important they were. And the reason that the salmon are so important is because they're such a large food source to other animals, right from when they're swimming up to when they die. And because the salmon are coming from the ocean, they have nutrients that there's no one else in the freshwater area has. So they're a valuable resource that can feed many different animals, and also when the animals are done with the salmon, their nutrients will fertilize the trees and the entire surrounding area. So you're probably thinking, why not just leave the fish alone and let them do their thing? But it's not that simple, because there are 2 dams that are on the Yuba River called Daguerre Point and Englebright dams. And after a certain height, fish can't get up the dams. It's an unnatural blockage, and so that there's parts of the river that they can't get to breed or to fertilize the area around it. There are several very important reasons why the dams are there in the first place, though. When back in the late 1800s, there was the gold rush, and tons of hydraulic mining was done in the area. which involved blasting away at hillsides and washing away the dirt in order to get the gold that was in the dirt. And all this debris, millions and millions of cubic feet, washed down the river and clogged it. And this changed the flow of the river, and it caused lots of problems. So the dams were originally put in order to catch debris and keep it there, as well as prevent flooding, because there was some really bad floods in the 1950s, I believe, that were very dangerous, so they needed the flood control. And added benefits of the dams include providing hydropower, and a very important one is providing water to farmers down in the Central Valley who rely on it in order to be able to grow their crops. And other uses of it include recreational reservoirs that have houseboats and people go to. So back to our field trip. We rafted down the river and saw we could see the salmon building their redds, and saw some of the males waiting and competing to see who can fertilize the eggs. And we also saw the aftermath of the gold mining. There was acres upon acres, thousands and thousands of pounds of debris that was just piled up. It was in this area called the gold fields, and you could just really see how barren and desolate it was, especially compared to another part of the river that we visited after that was green and just full of life, untouched. The next day we went with a spokesperson for the Maidu people. His name was Grayson. The Maidu are the indigenous people from the Yuba area, and they have a much more spiritual connection with the Yuba River and the salmon and the entire environment. We went into one of their traditional lodges and just talked about how he felt about the river, his connection with the Yuba River, and about the ceremony called Calling Back the Salmon. This is when they ceremonially fish for a salmon using the traditional harpoon, and once they get it, they'll run it, they give thanks for it, they thank it for allowing itself to give itself up to be fed, and they promise that they will keep the area as a warm and plentiful place for them so that the salmon will come back. And the Maidu believe that it's their responsibility to keep the environment and the river in as good condition as possible so that the salmon want to come back, and that it's a relationship. They work together for the benefit of both the salmon and the people. The next group that we visited was the YCWA, which is the Yuba County Water Agency. They're the group that own both the Gear Point and Englebright Dam, and they had obviously a very different perspective on the dams and how they should be used. The spokesperson that we met with, Geoff, had a more scientific view of the river. He acknowledged that the salmon are necessary, but pointed out that there is quite a bit of the river that the salmon can use, and that these dams are just so important in flood control, preventing all the debris, and most importantly, providing water to farmers who otherwise their livelihood would be ruined. And he made some very good points that there's really no right answer. It would be better for the environment if we removed the dams, maybe, but without the dams, we needed them to provide water and to provide flood control. So it's just, what do you do? It's a really interesting question, and one that I'm still wrestling with. Overall, it was a fascinating field trip, talking with all the different groups and learning all the opinions, and really just seeing how the democracy is working. There's no right answer. There's so many factors to take in. It's very complicated, but it's also extremely interesting. Both these groups believe that for the good of the entire river and for the good of the salmon, that the dams have to be removed so that the salmon can go the entire length and replenish the whole area that's been ravaged and can't heal itself because of these unnatural blockages.